Thank you for tuning in to today's full episode of the Breaking Changes podcast. I'm your host and chief evangelist for Postman, Kim Lane. With Breaking Changes, we explore specific topics from the world of APIs, but look at it through the lens of business and engineering leadership. Joining me today, we have Chander Shivdasani, Vice President at Marcus by Goldman Sachs. Chander stopped by to share insights about their contract-first approach to API infrastructure at Goldman Sachs, and how being API first helps them be more agile and nimble when it comes to responding to the market needs in the United Kingdom. Let's just start with the basics. Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, so my name is Chander. I'm currently the tech lead for Marcus UK, based out of London, working on the deposits platform for the consumer side of Goldman Sachs.
So what do APIs mean in your world, in this financial world?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question, actually. So the deposits platform that we currently have, it's a suite of microservices that, a lot of them talk to the external services. So API becomes quite important for us because managing such a big real estate of microservices gets quite tricky if we don't really have any specific common language that we can talk to across our services. And more importantly, if there's any change in any sort of part of the system, identifying that change and, identifying where that has happened and why that has happened, makes it quite easy. Like the API side of things makes it quite easy.
So is this more about modernization of the existing legacy infrastructure? Is it more about new products and services to meet the new demand, or is it all the above?
It's actually all of the above because there were some services when we started on the journey of launching the deposits platform. We did have some of the services that we inherited, as well as we had an open slate as well where we could come up with a bunch of new services specially tailored for our business. So yeah, it was all of the above. I think more importantly, we wanted to be agile as well in terms of reacting to market related changes. And it proved quite useful, especially in the last 2 years of COVID, where we had to react quite quickly to how the external market movements were impacting the deposits industry.
So let's talk a little bit about how you got here, how you made yourself this agile and flexible to respond. I'm assuming you're using Swagger, Open API, some sort of contract-driven approach.
Yeah. So basically, we internally call it contract first development. There's the way we started, back when the original team was working on the whole sort of setting up of services and getting one service to talk to another service. A common problem came up quite quickly was because since we were talking to external services and in our dev and QA environment, we were talking to their non-prod environment, we were able to see that they were making changes, and we would find the failures when we deployed the service and started testing those services in different environments. And some of those changes, even by the external services, were done intentionally, while some of them, trivial, some optional field was changed to mark as required, and then all the clients started failing, and there was no versioning whatsoever around that. So it became quite imminent for us to sort of come up with an approach that would allow us to identify these kind of things as early in the development cycle as possible. Open API or Swagger was pretty much the de facto standard back then for writing your API contracts. The open source tooling on top of that made it quite easy for us to generate a lot of boilerplate code. And it also helped in detecting a lot of these backwards incompatible changes. The other sort of advantage we saw as a side effect of this was, since the APIs were sort of descriptive, it became quite easy for us to sort of start reviewing them. So the type of process we started following was whenever we wanted to work on a change, a developer would start by either developing the API or modifying the existing API, get through that review cycle, get the feedback, and off the back of that, they could do the development. So became quite like it made the process like basically it introduced a form of process around how we manage APIs, and it sort of it grew quite a bit in the division that I was in. There was an API governance introduced around APIs because since a lot of teams within the division were sort of working on API and they were doing API first development, we started sort of identifying some common patterns and started enforcing those patterns across different teams just to keep our APIs consistent. So yeah, it kind of sort of evolved with a small idea of sort of managing APIs in a more sort of a methodical fashion, and it's become quite core to what we do right now.
Do you feel that I find I hear a lot of folks say contract first, but you're using it as the guiding kind of phrase. Do you feel like using that instead of API first or design first has some sort of impact, bringing it closer to business?
I think with business, I think what we realized was like having these kind of conversations around what we are building, especially from an API perspective, made it quite easy. Like firstly, to start identifying how long will it take for us to build something, because we weren't just talking about random numbers here. Now we have an API that we can look at, and we can get some reasonable estimates on what the development would look like. The second thing where it helped us from a business perspective quite a bit was quite often when you want to work with a new team or an external vendor, it's not quite easy to identify what that integration looks like. When some of the vendors who support like Open API and they can share us the Open API contract as part of the initial discussions, it makes it quite easy for us to start visualizing what we can do on our side, what that integration looks like. And in most cases, it helps us spin up like a mock server while the discussions with the vendor is still ongoing. We can sort of get an idea of what we need to do and start sort of developing our infrastructure around it.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're generating code, docs. You're able to use this as a way for getting partners on the same page. Did it reduce the time it took to engage with partners and get them up and running?
So, it made it easy, actually. I wouldn't say it reduced the time that much. Like to be honest, we never really quantified that. Like how much time did we really save with this? But it made the process a lot more easy, and it basically, like we were able to sort of have a quick turnaround times, especially in the lower environments, whenever we had a contract from a partner in an Open API format.
Yeah, no, definitely creates that common vocabulary, gets people on the same page. So how did you get what did it look like getting teams up to speed? I mean, I'm guessing the design review processes, but how do they learn about the governance and the patterns and what they should be doing across all teams?
So we rely quite heavily on code reviews. We basically, we have like the API governance team has a bunch of senior people who sort of get together to discuss changes and come up with what the architectural patterns should be. We rely a bit on them to sort of provide us with a guidance, especially for things that we don't have any common patterns across. Because for most of the common ones, like you could easily find what the best practices are. So that is one aspect of it. Like the tech leads that work in the division work quite closely with the API governance team. All of them basically talk to them on a regular basis. They are involved whenever there's an API related discussions happening. So essentially most of the senior devs are aware of the kind of guidelines. We've got a good level of documentation as well, defining what the common patterns are, how we should go about them. And in the end, like basically code review process. Anytime there's a code change and all, we go through a strict review process. So we discuss like why a particular change is needed, and we have a whole sort of a discussion around it. What the API governance team has also helped in cases is that they're building toolings around these kind of things. As an example, it allows them to create tooling around identifying backwards and compatible changes. So things like if we've made a field, we've deleted a field or added a field and made it required without any versioning around it. So it basically it gives you the advantage of automating a lot of it.
That automation and that enablement that is possible in a contract driven or API first driven reality is pretty key. And I'm assuming this is mapped to your existing software lifecycle through source control, CI, CD, and all of that?
Yes. Yeah. All of it is basically managed in a central repository, which is basically the ultimate source of where the contracts sit. All the review process and everything happen over there, like a typical merge request, reviews, and then merging if everything looks good. And these services depend on these contracts whenever they want to generate code.
Yeah. No, it sounds pretty modern as far as what I see across groups, and really using that contract as the standardizing force. What role does I know you're in the financial space, so regulation's a reality. What does regulation look like when it comes to this kind of contract driven approach?
It makes it easy. I think like since we work a lot with sensitive data, I think the main important thing we have is to make sure that the sensitive data is handled in a correct fashion. Like, for example, things like it doesn't get logged anywhere across the entire our suite of microservices. What contract first development and Open API makes it easy is basically for us to start identifying those things, because you get like a clear descriptive contract, and you can see that, hey, I'm dealing with a person entity here, and the person entity has a lot of PII fields. We do have certain sort of mechanisms in our tooling that allows us to, for example, audit our PII. So whoever basically accesses the PII, we can lock them and get the ID of the person who has viewed those PII. We have a way to sort of handle the logging centrally, where a lot of these PII fields by default are not logged. And then if there is a particular reason for us to log them, then we mask them in a particular way. Though we haven't really had any reason to sort of log any PIIs, but there's mechanisms that can identify these things. So like handling PII is like the main thing that, like, this contract first development as well as the Open API and the tooling around API, Open API has helped us.
Yeah, really maps that landscape as far as what is PII. I see it in healthcare space with PHI, and so having that Open API defined landscape really helps you see the landscape, know where you're doing this. So I'm guessing this helps you with GDPR as well, that you know where all your data is when they come asking.
Exactly. And then like with things like, where your aggregates are, and like if an aggregate represents a PII object, then what those PIIs are, like where basically in your entire life cycle of a request, the PII basically flows through from one service to another. And, it like you can then have those kind of dialogues around, whether this particular service really needs this particular PII or this particular field. Like whereas like in the previous JAX-RS or Spring Boot kind of world without Open API, I mean, you can certainly do that, but this gets a little difficult because then you have to really sort of look at the code to see how your request flows through. Whereas if you have like a self-described document, you've just got a one place to see, where your PII or where your sensitive fields are, and then you can easily trace it through your entire real estate.
Yeah, that's powerful. Do you think, I mean, is this something that is still very much in the domains of technical stakeholders, or are business stakeholders starting to understand the potential of this kind of Open API defined landscape?
I think in our case it has been purely technical so far. I think we This was like, I mean, APIs and the processing around it was never really an issue when it came to businesses anyways, because it's a lot like we work quite closely together to come up with, like, business sort of tell us what needs to happen, and we have a discussion around how that needs to happen. So they haven't really been discussed, but they are aware that we use these kind of stuff. A lot of times when we have discussions with them, they kind of understand that, if there's an open API or there's an API spec that we can look at, it will make things much easy.
Yeah. How is this helping you with your legacy infrastructure and evolving? Is it helping you kind of map the monolithic what's existed before and move it forward?
So in terms of that, we are halfway there actually. Like, we haven't really fully sort of gotten rid of all the monoliths or all the legacy systems. Mm-hmm. But what we've done in some cases is introduce these anti-corruption layers in between whenever we talk to services that we don't have any direct control over. So those basically, then we define clear contract for the anti-corruption layer. So basically all the microservices that talk to this external service go via anti-corruption layer. So the contracts on our side, we try to keep it as clean as possible and as standardized as possible. And all the adaptation that we have to do then sits on the anti-corruption layer. The other thing that we've been able to do is in some services that don't traditionally follow the model of contract first development, we've still been able to use the client generators for them using the existing contracts, and we've tried to sort of reduce the bridge as much as possible. Though that being said, there's still certain aspects where we have to go and modify the API directly in some of these services, and that's something that we were sort of looking at and trying to sort of move to a more standardized way of doing that. But it has certainly helped us with the code generation side of things.
Yeah, docs and code gen are the two top drivers of folks. But then realizing the benefits of getting everyone on the same page and mapping the landscape is kind of the next level, where people are usually amazed at the visibility, at the control they get over their infrastructure once they start mapping it out. So is this helping you understand dependencies as well? I mean, you're talking about the microservices relationships in there.
Yes. Like a lot of times when we talk about moving a particular component from the old way of doing things to sort of using Open API, a lot of time we start identifying things that, this particular service has this dependency, but it's not using it. So let's get rid of it. Like it makes it quite easy, because when you try and start sort of integrating it with the services that do use Open API and you've got these code generators, you start seeing things like, okay, this particular POJO is not being used at all, which is quite difficult when you have all this magic happening behind the scenes, like using serialization and stuff. It's not that easy for you to visualize or even, use like some of the smart benefits of like your IDEs to identify these kind of things.
Yeah, and it's critical to be able to move the enterprise ship forward in any sort of meaningful way. But when it comes to enforcement, and when we talked about governance, when it comes to enforcement of governance, are you finding more success in like earlier shifting left design time, application of governance, or is it more pipeline? Hey, nothing's going to get out the door, or is it a combo of and design reviews help with that?
So design reviews help quite a bit. So we try to have everything during the code reviews time. And that's what the API governance team is quite focused on as well, and that's why they're sort of investing on quite heavily on the toolings around it. Because once the API is merged and let's say being released to production, then it's out of your hand. Like modifying something in production then becomes quite a costly affair. So we try to sort of to shift left and try and identify as much as possible during the SDLC. So we basically get our changes merged by not just one person, but quite a few people. Like some of the simple stuff, then it's you've got standard patterns, that's fine. But when it comes to like tricky things like pagination, and those kind of things, where you don't really have a established like pattern, because you basically are dealing with another service that requires some fields that are not standardized. So we try to have discussions around it. We do involve other teams, because sometimes what happens is you're working quite closely with this. It gets a bit difficult for you to take a step back and understand if there's a better way to doing things. So we sort of leverage other teams in the division as well, if we need to sort of understand how they've been doing things, whether they've come across similar patterns. So yeah, it basically gives us a way to have all these dialogues quite upfront, and we try to do it as upfront as possible.
Yeah, and it sounds like it really kind of naturally gets everyone on the same page. They're more aware. It's just the pipeline's just not breaking, and they don't know why, or someone's not gatekeeping, and they're able to actually understand the reasons and the logic behind it.
Exactly,
which helps out a lot. So, what's the API lifecycle from your view? And I know this is a hard one; it means different things to different people. But if you were to lay out, define, design, deploy, like what's your general lifecycle view of how you move APIs forward?
So, typically, let's say we've got a particular requirement that we are working on. There would be two things: either that would require us to modify an existing API, or it would require us to introduce a new API. And then we typically start with contracts. That's the first thing we do. What that helps us also from an SDLC perspective is, once we have the contracts, then we can have like two individuals, one focused on implementing that contract and the other person focused on thinking about testing. How are we going to test this? And it doesn't really block us, because we don't have to wait for the SDLC or the development to complete before a person can start testing that. So what we essentially do is we get the contract, send it out for review. The individual might be making changes or at least implementing that contract while the review process is happening, just to get a bit more insight. But the contract needs to be approved and merged before we can actually consider the code change to be done. So that happens, and then basically we have once the contract is merged, then we go through a typical process of the code change. The code change gets merged, and then changes gets deployed to dev, and then it goes through like other higher environments before reaching production. I think like what certainly helps is the testing side of things in this, because once you know what kind of, like from a testing perspective, I think all you need is what the input is going to be and what the output is going to be, which Open API makes it quite easy to visualize. And then we don't really have to have like a waterfall kind of a thing within our Scrum, where like one person is waiting for the other person to implement everything before they can start doing something. So we tend to sort of use contract as that starting point.
It really feels like it gives multiple people, multiple roles, what they need to kind of move the whole thing forward, and everyone just kind of falls in line in a certain process, and it comes together and moves to production. So how many different types of roles are involved in this process? Is it purely developers and QA? Is there security folks part of the handoff? Like what are all the roles involved?
So typically the reviewers also wear the security hat pretty much all the time, because as we deal with sensitive data, like each one of the developers, especially senior developers, have to be quite wary of the changes that are happening. And again, coming back to the PII or any sort of authentication related stuff. So essentially, like from our perspective, when a review gets merged, that typically has two aspects to it. It needs to be reviewed from a tech risk perspective. Like, so what we call is like application security champion. So we have a process where typically each one of the developer goes through a formal training to understand the risk and security patterns that are needed. So basically, so they can embed that as part of their own development lifecycle. So a review review means basically two things. The patterns from API perspective are being reviewed, as well as anything from an security or technology risk perspective has been reviewed. So both of these basically are sort of done at the review stage.
Nice. Yeah. I think the role of the is not just a design review; it's just a general review of, and it encompasses governance, quality, security, and education. People learn, the developers are learning along the way as well. Is pretty key. So what's the gateway landscape going out the door? Like, what's the gateway landscape look like? Are you guys one central gateway rules them all? Are you more a federated approach, multiple gateways? What's your view of things?
So we've got multiple gateways model because different businesses operate a little differently. So specifically for the business that I'm involved in, we've got a separate gateway, which we use to sort of it's kind of like our front line from where all the requests come in, and we do a lot of initial checks and stuff over there. And then basically it gets sent to the federated suite of microservices that we have running, depending on what the flow looks like.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Pretty common, I would say, pattern that I see across different enterprise organizations. And so I would say in the grand scheme of things, you're UK focused, or are you addressing multiple regional concerns as well when it comes to your deployments?
So I think, we focus purely on the UK business. So not necessarily the deployments are UK focused, but the business is UK focused. But it's a quite a collaborative division. As I said, like we talk to each other quite a bit, try and understand if there's a piece of functionality that we can reuse if we need to. But yeah, like essentially we when we do the development, some of it would be focused quite heavily on the UK business because of the nature of the things.
Yeah. Do you feel? I feel like I'm not an expert on PSD2 or financial regulations, but I've been following along as a spectator for a while. Would you say that the UK is the most advanced when it comes to this type of regulation in not just Europe but the world? Would you say that the model is something that's healthy and should be emulated throughout the world? Maybe that's too big of a question.
Well, to be honest, that's a bit outside my domain because we work quite a bit from a GDPR perspective. But yeah, anything outside of that is certainly not something that I can comment on.
Fair
but
enough.
Yeah, it's a little different than the different regional based services that I've sort of been involved with. So definitely, there's a bit more sort of strict processes around it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your honesty on that. I'm always trying to. There's a lot of different opinions on whether PSD2 and we're a failure or not, or successful, and so I'm always trying to scratch and get new views. But for you, like moving to you personally, like, why are you doing APIs? Why does this type of work even something that you're interested in?
I think I've been doing APIs for a while now. Different flavors of APIs, because APIs mean different things to different people. Like even within the firm that I am, like APIs mean different things to different people. But I think it just basically one of the things I really enjoy about APIs is basically the whole sort of a language aspect to it. Like it's basically you're trying to get one service to talk to another service. Like how effectively and how efficiently you can make that conversation happen. So that's something that I quite enjoy. Then you've got different aspects around synchronous communication versus asynchronous communication, which you might not use Open API, you might use things like Avro and stuff. But again, they sort of, you're trying to come up with a unified language that you can, establish between two services that speak completely different language.
Yeah. One of the more interesting API conversations I've ever had was I went up to Oxford for a full day and spent time with the Oxford English Dictionary API folks. And so it wasn't just like the OED as an API, but it was their story about how language, they've tracked language and across generations, but across country boundaries. And it really reminds me a lot of APIs because, here's a question for you. How much of your job is technical versus business versus like people stuff? Is technical the majority of it, or is it a lot of other things?
Like on an average, if I consider like last 6 months or so, it's been like you could just split that evenly across all three stuff. Though there are different aspects where like certain weeks I'm focused a lot on technology and development side of things. Certain sort of period where I'm focused a lot on people management, especially around feedback discussions, end of year reviews and stuff. So it kind of sort of shifts quite sort of depending on what's going on in the business. But yeah, it's like in a 6-month period, I think that would be like evenly split across all of it.
Yeah, and the people, in my experience, it's very much a human driven thing. But you have to know your technology, and you have to like you mentioned, asynchronous and Avro, and you have to start understanding these other technologies alongside. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes, and that'll impact your business, cause people issues, and things can happen. So I find the people side of it and the org shifting. Changing an organization to be very fascinating. Why the financial sector? What about the financial sector attracts you?
I think the challenge actually, like the scale of things that we do is quite sort of impressive with the way we've managed it. It's been quite a fascinating journey from like I joined the team before the business went live. And like seeing how things have been before, we were still sort of trying to figure out what does production environment mean for us and what would the business look like when we go live to where we are now. It's been a fascinating journey. The other thing, like the people I work with on a day-to-day basis, they've been like one of the major reasons. Like all of them are quite smart. Like part of the reason I sort of I can sort of pick up new technologies is because you just call up someone and just chat with them about the particular technology, because there's just so many different people with diversified interests. Like it just makes it easy for you to sort of understand what's really out there. So that's been like the people side of things. Working here has been quite fascinating. Yeah, and then I think sort of like the kind of challenges that sort of when you've got like one sort of I don't want to call it legacy system, but let's say old system, because we don't really deal with legacy systems that much. But like how do you like the things that we've built 3-4 years ago? I mean, people are going to call it old or legacy systems now. And how do you sort of keep those kind of systems continuously evolved with the latest trends and stuff? So that's another sort of fascinating aspect to it. No, so the other thing was like the domain itself is quite interesting as well, because if you think from a customer perspective, like you're building something that I can actually tell like my parents, my wife that what I'm doing. Like it's a digital bank, they understand what that is. Yeah. So from a customer point of view, it's a simplified view, but there's a lot of technical nitty-gritty that happens underneath, like when you're dealing with payments, when you're dealing with regulations. So it's been challenging from all across the corners, and it's been quite sort of rewarding as well, because when you sort of build something and you can tell people that this is something you built, you can sort of get some sort of feedback from that.
Yeah. I think the relating to normal people, what we do is always an interesting challenge. I think most of my family thinks I play video games for a living because they really don't understand APIs. So payments are pretty universal. Everyone's going to understand that one. So I like that as far as being able to do it. Do you think being API first, because what you said about legacy a little bit ago, an interview I did a few weeks back with an AWS architect, he said, well, did you write it yesterday? It's legacy code, Yeah. And so do you think being API first is going to help prevent so much pain with legacy in the future, that we're going to be able to move forward and iterate?
Like I mean, it definitely will help, but I think it needs to be continuously evolved as well, from my perspective, because like and this has happened to us as well, like quite a few times where we've taken like some API related decisions that made sense to us like a year or two ago, but a lot of the assumptions that we've made, a lot of the sort of preconceived notions that we have, and like our technical expertise have also since then increased and changed. So we try and sort of like it's so as long as you keep up. And as long as you sort of go back and revisit and just try and understand whether it still makes sense. Sometimes it might not make sense, and you have to figure out whether we want to do things differently. But I think what I find it quite useful in this case is like it's just one document I need to go back and check like whether it still makes sense, like whether the learning that we did today can that be retrospectively applied to any of the things we've done in the past. And it basically, like Open API gives you that sort of power and tooling, because you could just version your API, deploy a new version of API, test that in different environments, and like just flip a DNS alias somewhere to get customers to start using the new service. So it definitely helps. But I think as a technologist or as a developer, that like we need to sort of go back and keep sort of re-evolving the things that we've done. Only if it makes sense.
Agreed. So has COVID world changed your approach or in any ways who you are, what you're building?
Not much actually. Like we've had like a lot of these asynchronous ways of communication, and like even pre-COVID, we were sort of moving towards a more memo-driven approach to how we do architectural stuff, because a lot of times the common challenge we had was, and this was pre-COVID as well, that a lot of the architectural decisions that you take, everyone sort of agrees to, and it makes sense when you're taking it, but since it's not documented, like a year or two down the line, or even like few months down the line, you look at it and you think, why did we make this decision? So what we are trying to do is to basically get a bit more like a lot of these decisions documented, and then the process that we want to follow is like a lot of asynchronous way of getting feedback from stakeholders, because it's just not scalable to have meetings all the time and expect people to join and provide their opinions all the time. So having like a document where you define your constraints, the architectural approach that you're taking and why you're taking, and then sharing that across to different stakeholders so they can provide asynchronous feedback. So that's something that we have, like even pre-COVID was something that we started to do. And it helps on multiple levels. Like you've got new joiners joining in, you've got a documentation completely ready of your architecture that they can just review and they can reason out as well, because a lot of times it gets quite difficult for new joiners to reason why they are doing it in a particular way. Because, you've got a fresh perspective and you think that, this could be done in that way or this way. So having like a well-documented reason, and more importantly, the kind of, the kind of architectural compromises that you make, having that documented helps quite a bit as well.
Yeah, it feels like the contract first approach allows us to not just document the decision now, but we have that historical record that anyone can learn from and come and go, because we're going to have to build for turnover in our staff and our teams. People are going to change departments. People are going to come and leave, and we need that codified as part of our overall capacity. This is what we do. These are our resources and capabilities, and the quality, the security, all that work has to be codified and translatable across teams and stakeholders.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it just makes it easy for us to, just share it across to different teams as well. Like, for example, if we've built something that is common enough for other teams to use, we could just share the contracts with them. They can review it and they can, help us make platformize a particular component that we're working on as well. So like a lot of it is like, and granted, a lot of it was not something I don't think anybody really thought of that before doing contract first. But the kind of, benefits that we've seen, like purely not just the technical benefits, but also the communication aspect of what you do has been quite impressive. And I think that has just re-emphasized us that, like what the kind of path that we are on, and this is something that we need to continue to follow. And that's why, like, even from a firm perspective, there's been a lot of investments around like how we do things and how do we get this out there to other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to a lot of people doing APIs, and I tend to categorize people based upon how they respond to things like, and the being contract driven or API first or not is a big piece of it. And how people use that, because a lot of people will say, well, yeah, we use Swagger or Open API and we publish our docs with it. And then they stop there. And I go, oh, I mean, that's shows they're not as far along in their journey. But where y'all are at, like, you see, it's not just docs and code gen. It's that holistic collaboration, automation, governance, that whole full suite that comes with it, and that shared understanding that's essential to move things forward.
Definitely. And I think huge credit to the people like before me who've been sort of pushing this API side of things, and kind of has helped us immensely.
Right. I love the API journey. That's what this is all about for me. I've been doing it since 2010 full time, and so I've seen a lot of people at different points in the journey. I'm on my own as far as my understanding. But what do you do to stay interesting, curious, passionate outside of APIs? What keeps you going?
I love cooking. I do enjoy cooking. At one point in time, I was actually studying to become a chef before I pivoted myself to the technology. So cooking is something I really enjoy. Spending time with my family. I have a 2.5-year-old. So he keeps me quite busy and entertained as well. I would have said traveling, but I haven't done much traveling in the last 2.5 years as well because of COVID. But traveling is another thing I quite enjoy. And especially being here in London opens up a lot of gates. Like, there's a lot of nearby sort of destinations that you can simply hop onto and get a completely different perspective.
Yeah, well, enjoy those years. Those years that your son is right now. Those are the good ones. So I think it's somewhat of a blessing that you get to stay home. And my daughter, she's off doing university in Seoul, South Korea, so I don't see her as much and miss those days. But enjoy them. Well, I really appreciate this. Has been a fascinating walk, in your shoes as far as how you see the API space. Really impressed how far along in your journey y'all are. I would love to definitely stay in touch. Feel free to ping me when new releases or new interesting areas that you want to chat about. Cause I love exploring this and the financial space, educating folks about it, but even beyond, a lot of people are interesting to learn from your experience. So I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Ken. Really had a wonderful time chatting with you about everything API. It's been a good conversation, actually. Like, a lot of things I never really sat down and actually thought about, and only sort of thought about how important this has all been while chatting with you. So really, thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you thinking on your feet too, because for everyone listening, we talked before and we had some notes, but I did not provide them with any scripted questions, and I just kind of grilled you, and you did great. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again to Chander for stopping by. You can find more about Marcus by Goldman Sachs at marcus.co.uk, and you can find Chander on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to the Breaking Changes podcast at postman.com/events/breaking-changes. I'm your host, Ken Lane, and until next time, cheers.